Chapter 1. I stirred from my fitful sleep as the first rays of the toxic dawn filtered through our makeshift shelter. Blinking away the remnants of uneasy dreams, I took in the familiar sight of our cramped living space. The walls, a patchwork of scavenged metal sheets and synthetic fabrics, offered little protection against the harsh reality outside. My name is Darius, and this is my life in the outskirts of Section Z City. The air inside our shelter hung heavy with the acrid smell of chemical preservatives and the musty odor of damp cloth. I pushed myself up from my threadbare sleeping mat, wincing as my joints creaked in protest. Immediately, my eyes sought out my mother, Priscilla. She lay on her cot across the small room, her face unnaturally pale. A faint luminescence pulsed beneath her skin, casting eerie shadows in the dim light. Her chest rose and fell with labored breaths, each inhale carrying a strange, alien melody.
"Mother status?"
I whispered, falling into the familiar pattern of speech we used at home. The words felt dry and awkward in my mouth, a stark contrast to the fluid, casual speech used beyond our walls. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that shimmered with an iridescent quality. The effect was unsettling, like opals catching the light in a world devoid of beauty.
"Functionality diminished, Darius offspring,"
she responded, her voice a mixture of warmth and precise diction that never failed to send a shiver down my spine. I nodded, understanding her meaning if not the exact nature of her condition. The worry I'd been holding at bay threatened to overwhelm me, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the tasks at hand. There would be time for concern later. Now, I needed to act.
"Initiating daily resource acquisition,"
I said, the formal words feeling natural on my tongue within the confines of our home. I moved around our small space, gathering the tools I'd need for the day's scavenging. The familiar weight of my backpack and the reassuring presence of my makeshift weapon grounded me in the reality of our situation. As I prepared to step outside, I took one last look at my mother. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, the effect both beautiful and alien. Her long silver hair fanned out on the pillow, moving slightly as if suspended in water. The sight of her, so otherworldly yet so familiar, steeled my resolve for the day ahead. I pushed aside the heavy fabric that served as our door and stepped into the harsh world beyond. The desolate landscape stretched before me, a grim reminder of the nuclear holocaust that had reshaped our world. Twisted metal structures jutted from the ground like the bones of long-dead beasts, while a thick layer of ash covered everything in sight. The air outside assaulted my senses. I took a deep breath, tasting the metallic tang that never seemed to dissipate. The scent of decay and chemicals hung heavy in the atmosphere, a constant reminder of the world we'd lost.
"Another day in paradise,"
I muttered, squinting against the sickly light of the toxic dawn. The sarcasm felt hollow, but it was a shield against the grim reality that surrounded us. I set out toward the massive garbage heaps that bordered the city, my hunting grounds for anything of value. The crunch of debris under my boots and the distant howl of wind through the ruins were my only companions as I made my way across the wasteland. As I walked, my mind wandered to my mother and the secrets I sensed she was keeping. There was so much about her I didn't understand. Her strange manner of speaking, her mysterious past, the illness that defied explanation. But she was my mother, the only family I had ever known, and I would do anything to keep her safe. The looming piles of trash and discarded tech grew larger on the horizon, promising both danger and opportunity. Another day of scavenging awaited, another chance to find something, anything that might help my mother. With a deep breath, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. The garbage heaps loomed before me, mountains of discarded dreams and broken technology. The stench of decay and rusted metal assaulted my nostrils as I began my daily scavenge. My hands moved automatically, sorting through the debris while my mind drifted to thoughts of my mother. Memories surfaced of a time when I was younger, curiosity overcoming my usual reticence. I had asked her why she spoke differently from the people in the city. The scene played out vividly in my mind's eye. Mother's iridescent eyes had focused on something I couldn't see, a faint shimmer passing over her pale skin.
"Words are precise tools, Darius offspring,"
she had said, her voice carrying that strange melodic undertone.
"Clarity ensures survival."
I hadn't understood then, and I wasn't sure I did now. but it was part of who she was, as familiar to me as the ethereal glow of her eyes in the dark or the strange musical quality to her breathing. The memory faded as a glint of metal caught my eye, pulling me back to the present. Carefully, I excavated the area around it, revealing a small device that looked far more advanced than the usual scrap I found. My heart raced as I realized it might be pre-war tech. I turned the device over in my hands, feeling its surprising weight. The casing was smooth, unmarred by the ravages of time that affected everything else in this wasteland. Intricate patterns etched into its surface seemed to shift and change as I examined it, defying my attempts to understand its purpose.
Optimal find.
I murmured in our home speech before catching myself and glancing around to ensure no one had heard. The last thing I needed was to draw attention to myself out here. The rest of the day passed in a blur of aching muscles and small victories. By the time the toxic sun began to set, casting an eerie, multi-hued glow across the wasteland, I had a collection of items that might fetch a decent price. The weight of my backpack pressed against my shoulders, a reminder of the day's labor and the potential it held. As I made my way back through the ruins, the pre-war device seemed to grow heavier in my pocket. Its presence nagged at me, raising questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. What was it? Why had it survived when so much else had been destroyed? And most importantly, could it help my mother? The sickly sweet scent of night-blooming mutant flora began to permeate the air, signaling the approach of darkness. I quickened my pace, all too aware of the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the ruined city. The familiar silhouette of our makeshift shelter came into view, a patchwork structure that somehow managed to stand against the harsh elements. Relief washed over me as I approached, knowing that behind those mismatched walls my mother waited. I paused at the entrance, taking a moment to compose myself. The device in my pocket felt like a secret, one that might change everything. With a deep breath, I pushed aside the heavy fabric door and stepped inside. The interior of our shelter was dim, lit only by the faint glow emanating from my mother's skin. Her iridescent eyes fixed on me the moment I entered, seeming to peer into my very soul. The air around her shimmered slightly, as if reality itself bent in her presence.
Darius offspring report?
She asked, her voice stronger than it had been in the morning, but still carrying that otherworldly undertone. I moved closer, the familiar sense of our home, a mix of medicinal herbs and something indefinably alien, washing over me.
Resource acquisition successful, Mother.
I replied, slipping easily into our private language. My hand moved to my pocket, fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the device.
Potential high-value item located.
As I pulled out the pre-war tech to show her, I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition? Fear? It was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. The air around her seemed to ripple, distorting my view for just a moment.
Caution, Darius offspring.
She said, her voice lowering to a melodic whisper that seemed to resonate with the very walls of our shelter.
Pre-war artifacts often harbor unforeseen consequences.
I nodded, used to her cryptic warnings, but something in her tone made me pause. The device in my hands suddenly felt heavier, more significant.
Mother, query, do you possess knowledge about pre-war tech?
She was silent for a long moment. Her eyes, shimmering with colors I had no names for, seemed to focus on something far beyond our shabby walls. A faint ethereal glow emanated from her skin, casting strange shadows around our small home. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, carrying echoes of a world I'd never known.
Affirmative. But information. Dangerous. Extreme risk.
My heart raced. This was more than she'd ever revealed before about her past. The air in our shelter felt thick, charged with unspoken truths.
Mother, I am capable of handling dangerous information. Please share your knowledge.
She shook her head, the movement graceful yet alien. Her hair seemed to float for a moment, as if suspended in water, defying the laws of gravity I thought I understood.
Negative, Darius offspring. Your protection is paramount. Some secrets must remain hidden.
Frustration bubbled up inside me, but before I could press further, a coughing fit overtook her. Her body convulsed with an otherworldly grace even in its distress. I rushed to her side, holding her as the fit racked her frame. Her skin felt unnaturally cool under my touch, its texture almost silken, so different from my own. As the coughing subsided, she drifted into an uneasy sleep, leaving me with more questions than answers. I sat beside her cot, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the strange melodic undertone of her breathing. The pre-war device sat on a makeshift table nearby, its presence a constant reminder of the mysteries surrounding us. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. In the dim light of our shelter, its intricate patterns seemed to shift and dance as if alive. The next morning dawned, bringing with it the acrid smell of the wasteland that always managed to seep through our walls. Mother's condition hadn't improved. Her skin, always pale, now had an almost translucent quality to it. The faint glow beneath her skin pulsed weakly, like a fading star.
Mother's status?
I asked, falling into our familiar routine. Her iridescent eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with effort.
Functionality. Further diminished, Darius offspring.
She responded, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump forming in my throat.
Initiating resource acquisition for medical supplies,
I said, the formal words feeling hollow in the face of her worsening condition. As I prepared to leave, gathering my scavenging gear, Mother's voice stopped me.
Caution, Darius offspring. Market day brings increased risk.
I turned back to her, struck by the intensity in her gaze.
Acknowledged, Mother, but necessity overrides caution. Your condition requires immediate attention.
She was silent for a moment, her eyes flickering with those strange, unnamed colors.
Understood. Proceed with extreme vigilance.
I nodded, my resolve hardening. Whatever it took, I would find a way to help her. As I stepped out into the harsh light of the wasteland, the weight of the pre-war device in my pocket reminded me of the mysteries still unsolved. The path to the market stretched before me, a gauntlet of potential dangers, but for Mother, I would face them all. With a deep breath, tasting the metallic tang of the air, I set out, determined to find the answers and the cure she so desperately needed. The journey to the market was tense, the lawless outskirts a gauntlet of potential dangers. My eyes scanned constantly, alert for any sign of movement. The crunch of debris under my feet seemed too loud in the eerie silence of the wasteland. As I neared the city proper, I felt the familiar shift in my demeanor. My posture changed, becoming more guarded, and I consciously adjusted my speech patterns to align with the rough cadence of the other survivors. The pre-war device weighed heavily in my pocket, a constant reminder of my mission. The market sprawled before me, a chaotic mass of makeshift stalls and desperate people. The air was thick with the mingled scents of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and the acrid tang of chemicals. Shouts and haggling voices created a cacophony that assaulted my ears after the relative quiet of the outskirts. I made my way through the crowd, my senses on high alert. Hands brushed against me, and I instinctively checked my pockets, ensuring nothing had been stolen. The press of bodies was suffocating, so different from the open spaces of the wasteland. Old Jeb's stall came into view, a ramshackle structure of corrugated metal and salvaged wood. The old man himself stood behind a counter made from an upturned crate, his weathered face a map of the harsh world we lived in.
Well, if it ain't young Darius.
Jeb's gruff voice greeted me as I approached. His eyes, sharp despite his age, scanned me quickly.
What you got for me today, boy?
I laid out my finds, saving the pre-war device for last. Jeb's eyes widened when he saw it, a mix of greed and fear flickering across his face. The reaction sent a chill down my spine.
Now, where'd you dig up this little beauty?
He asked, his voice low and cautious. His gnarled hands hovered over the device, not quite touching it.
Found it in the heaps,
I replied, trying to sound casual despite the tension coiling in my gut.
It worth anything?
Jeb examined the device, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the constant noise of the market around us. Finally, he spoke.
Might be. Tell you what, I'll give you a fair price for the lot.
As we concluded our transaction, a commotion broke out nearby. The crowd parted, revealing a group of city guards pushing their way through. Their armor, a patchwork of pre-war tech and scavenged materials, stood out starkly against the drab clothes of the market-goers. Jeb's face paled, his eyes darting between me and the approaching guards.
You best scram, kid,
he said hurriedly, his voice barely above a whisper.
And if anyone asks, you didn't get those credits from me, got it?
I nodded, slipping away into the crowd. The press of bodies provided cover but also made it difficult to move quickly. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to put distance between myself and the guards. As I made my escape, snatches of the guards' conversation reached my ears.
Mana radiation detected.
One voice said.
Unauthorized salvage.
Added another. My mind raced. The guards' words seemed to confirm the significance of what I'd found. But more than that, they hinted at a connection to Mother's mysterious nature. The term mana radiation echoed in my head, raising more questions than answers. I finally broke free of the market, my lungs burning as I gulped in the acrid air of the outskirts. The weight of the credits in my pocket offered little comfort as I considered the potential consequences of my actions. Whatever I'd stumbled into, it was clear that the stakes were higher than I'd imagined. With a final glance over my shoulder to ensure I wasn't being followed, I set off for home. Mother needed the medicine, but I now carried more than just credits. The burden of dangerous knowledge weighed heavily on me as I navigated the treacherous landscape of the wasteland. I returned home, my mind reeling from the events at the market. The familiar sight of our makeshift shelter did little to calm my nerves. As I pushed aside the heavy fabric door, the air inside hit me, a mix of medicinal herbs and that undefinable alien scent that always clung to Mother. Mother was awake, her iridescent eyes fixing on me the moment I entered. The dim interior seemed to shimmer around her, reality bending in her presence.
Darius offspring. Anomalies detected in your physiological state. Report.
She said, her tone mixing concern with that strange, precise diction. For a moment, I was tempted to fall back into our familiar patterns, to report my
Mission status.
and pretend everything was normal. But the weight of what I discovered pressed on me, as heavy as the credits in my pocket.
Mother, medicine acquisition successful.
I said, reverting to our home speech. My hand shook slightly as I pulled out the vial I'd purchased with my black market credits.
Administering new treatment protocol.
She nodded, the movement fluid yet somehow off-kilter, as if she was moving through a medium I couldn't perceive. I carefully measured out the dose, the liquid inside the vial, an unnatural shade of green that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. I helped her take it, hope flaring in my chest despite everything. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then without warning, she began to convulse. Her body arched with an otherworldly grace even as spasms racked her frame. The air around her rippled, distorting my view.
Mother!
I cried out, abandoning our formal speech in my panic. I held her as the fit continued, feeling strange, rippling vibrations running through her body like currents in an alien sea. The scent in the air intensified, a mixture of ozone and something I had no name for. When the spasms finally subsided, she lay still, her breathing labored and her iridescent eyes dimmer than before. Frustration and fear boiled over inside me, the events of the day crashing down all at once.
Mother,
I said, deliberately using the more human term.
I need to know the truth. About you, about your past. What aren't you telling me? Why isn't any medicine working?
She was silent for a long moment, her eyes flickering with colors I had no names for. When she spoke, her voice was softer, almost human, yet carrying echoes of something vast and unknowable.
Query denied, Darius offspring. Information classified to ensure your safety.
But I'm not a child anymore.
I exclaimed, frustration breaking through my usual calm. The words tumbled out, fueled by fear and desperation.
I heard things at the market about mana radiation. It's connected to you, isn't it? To your illness?
A series of expressions flitted across her face, fear, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite identify.
Affirmative.
She finally said.
Connection exists, but full disclosure would initiate unacceptable risk scenarios.
I sat down heavily on the edge of her cot, trying to process this. The rough texture of the blanket under my hands grounded me as my world seemed to shift.
Your illness. It's not natural, is it? That's why none of the medicines work, not even this new one.
Correct assumption.
She replied, her voice barely above a whisper, yet seeming to resonate with the very air around us.
Darius offspring. This form's existence is nearing its conclusion, but you must not seek answers. Danger levels transcend comprehension.
I looked at her, this woman who had raised me, who had always been a mystery even as she was the center of my world. Her strange speech, her iridescent eyes, the otherworldly sheen of her skin. How had I never truly questioned these things before?
I don't care about the danger.
I said firmly, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice.
You're my mother. Whatever secrets you're carrying, whatever past you're running from, we'll face it together. We have to find a cure,